Hi everyone, thank you for tuning in. In this session, we'll be looking into getting started with step functions. So, a little bit about me. I'm Zachariah Noel, popularly known as Zachariah Noel all over the internet. I am an AWS community builder. I am a cloud architect for serverless at Mobile Solutions and Services Private Limited, Bengaluru, India. I love to talk about serverless. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn or Twitter if you have any queries and questions about serverless. In this session, we'll be looking into what are step functions, what are the different integration patterns available with step functions, and also the integration possibilities that's there with the SDK integration that's been recently announced. We'll also look into different ways of how we could deploy step functions, and we'll have a demo with the Workflow Studio. So, what are step functions? Step functions are nothing but state machines which orchestrate serverless workflows, which can also integrate with different AWS services to uh, orchestrate the complete flow and ensuring that there is integration with a lots of different things, and uh, the flow is being orchestrated, and also the states have been managed by step functions. With state machines and tasks, you can build full-fledged applications, and uh, also there is a lot of error handling that's available, which enables you to handle errors and ensure that the state machine gracefully ends the execution and it does not hang up in the middle of the execution. You could see a snippet available of the state machine itself, the pictorial representation of the state machine, where there is a start and end, and between which there is multiple things that's happening. So it's integrating with S3 to list the buckets. It's using a map to loop through all the buckets, and also it's using get public access block, which is getting the public access of the specific bucket. And if it is public, it's publishing to an SNS topic, and also it's making the bucket private. The different step function states that's available is a task, which is a single unit of work which integrates with different AWS services via SDK and optimized integration. There's also choices for conditional branching of flows. So suppose you would have to compare a couple of conditions, and based on which you would have to decide to either branch the flow and go on with the flow. There's parallel for forking and ensuring that the tasks happen in the parallel and synchronously. Wait helps you to wait for a certain period, and it checks back again, and the flow continues. If you would wish to end your execution with a failure, there's a fail state available, and if you wish to end your execution with a successful status, you have succeed. In case if you just want to pass the output to another input, you have pass, which just passes through to the next state. Map enables you to use a for loop structure, looping through different array items. Step function provides two different workflow types. One is standard, and the other one is express. Express, as the name suggests, it's a shorter duration one, uh, which has a lot of capabilities of executing uh, a lot of requests per second, and also the state transition is literally unlimited. Whereas for a standard workflow, the maximum duration is 1 year. So things like ETL jobs, or if you have any uh, DevOps based job that is running, so it could be a standard workflow. Whereas if you're integrating with a specific SDK to fetch some items, or if you're using SDK integration to do a translation using translate uh, AWS service, you could even use with a express, which passes the input, translates, returns back, and the complete action happens within a millisecond. The execution of a standard is guaranteed for only once, whereas the express, it can happen multiple times, but it'll happen at least once. The pricing is different for different type of workflows. For a standard, it's based upon the state transition that's there. So for if you have about 10 states in your workflow, and the transition between those 10 states is what you would be paying for, whereas for a express, it is based upon the number of executions of the complete workflow and the duration it takes for a specific execution, and the memory that's been consumed during the execution. Step function service integration happens at different ways, where uh, it could be with SDK APIs or optimized integration, which under the hood uses a HTTP based request, which expects a response back so that it can proceed ahead. So those are called as response. If you were using a job to work on, and it's an asynchronous job, and you would have to wait for a while to ensure that the job is done and then proceed ahead with another API call. So in terms of just for example, extract, if you're analyzing a document, there's a asynchronous way of doing it. So you could first start the job with start analyze, and then you could wait for a while, and then you could check if the job is over or not. So those kind of jobs, you would be waiting for a while. So the synchronous based jobs could be run, and the other one being callback, where there's multiple invocations and you want to identify for which request did this response come. You could send a token, and the SDK will use that token to be passed in the response, ensuring that there is the continuity, and ensuring that the uh, token which is sent in the request is the same in the response, which will enable you to map the request and the response. Recently, Step Functions announced SDK integrations with uh, over 200 plus AWS services. So you could integrate with a lot of services uh, from the Workflow Studio or from your state machine with SDK based APIs to do various things, such as if you would wish to invoke a Lambda function, if you would wish to run a code build job, or if you would wish to do some S3 based operations, uh, you do that with the SDK APIs itself. Whenever you want to build a new step function state machine or deploy it to the cloud, the different ways of doing it is with the Workflow Studio being the interactive UI on the step functions console, where you can drag and drop different services and add them up and ensure that there is the different uh, parameters that's been mapped, being a state machine definition. And with those state machine definition, which comes as a JSON file, like the highlighted part in the picture in the slide, the JSON file could be used to, which could be exported from the console and could be used as infrastructure as code. So for anybody who's infrastructure as code fan, and they use a lot of SAM CLI or CDK to build their serverless application, they could use the state machine definition along with the IAC based tool to deploy the complete step functions to the cloud. So let's look into the demo. So in this demo, we'll be using Workflow Studio from the AWS console to create the different state machine and to view the different executions. So we'll go with standard. And again, if you want to differentiate or identify what suits your uh, use case, there's always a differentiation between the standard and the express available on the console, which helps you decide which type of a workflow you would want to go with. So we'll go with standard and next. So once you enter the Workflow Studio, the there's a different the complete menu of all the services is available, where you can select a specific service and do a couple of operations. In this demo, we'll be using DynamoDB. So you could, what you could do is you could do a query of items. So, so the SDK API of how the query works, it takes in the table name, and you can even view into the API documentation if you are unfamiliar with SDK based APIs. So all these things could be mentioned in the query editor in the parameter mapping of step functions. So uh, once you head to the Workflow Studio, you have a menu of all the SDK APIs that's available. So in this demo, we'll be using DynamoDB. And once you click on DynamoDB, all the SDK APIs are available. And we'll go with query. And you can specify the parameters, what's going to be passed into the DynamoDB SDK. So you can copy and paste it. I'll be copying it and pasting it. So in this demo, what has been specified is it uses a table name called users demo, which has an index email ID, and the email is being passed as a input to the specific state. So whenever we are specifying inputs, we would have to specify the key with key to be ending with dot dollar, and the variable which has been holding the value with should start with dollar dot. And once this is done, you can specify the output. So whenever the output is being fetched, you could say that the output could be fetched in a specific path. So you can add the path. You can add the path in here where it adds to the JSON that's been initially sent as an input. And once this is being done, we'll have a flow which checks if the user exists or not. So we could have a choice where it's branching between the condition that's matching up. So we could have in the choice, we could add a rule which says we'll have a condition. Let's say the user exists is the response that's been sent from the DynamoDB query, and count holds the number of objects it holds. So we'll do a is equal to and the number constant. If the count is 0, it means that the user does not exist. So save. And if the user does not exist, we could what we could do is we could create the user and write it into the DynamoDB table. So we'll use put item whenever the item count is 0. If if the user already exists, what we could do is we could just pass it and end the complete workflow. So whenever we are doing a put, we would have to specify the object, and we would have to specify the API parameters for that object. In that case, what the API parameters require item, and this has ID that's available. So the DynamoDB table users demo uses a partition key with which is a string, and the ID is being passed as an input. Email ID, which is another attribute, which is a string, which is also coming as an input. So the inputs have been marked with dollars, so you could so that the state machine could identify that this specific value is uh, is a value that is coming from the input. So going back to the flow, how it is, we'll say we'll add the response to the original JSON, and pass is nothing going to do, is just going to pass whatever it gets into the next state, so it just ends the complete flow. So whenever we're creating this, and next, so once the workflow is once the state machine is created, the complete uh, state machine definition that's there as a JSON is being created. So this file could be exported, and this is what could be used in your IAC based tool, where you could use this to create complete step function deployed over IAC, such as SAMCLI or CDK. So once you click on, and it also shows a pictorial representation of the workflow, where the first step being the query. Once the query is done, it checks and it does a conditional branching with choice. If the count is 0, it does a put item. If otherwise, in the default case, it just passes to the end. So whenever you're creating the state machine, you would have to give it a name. It'll ask you to create a new role, and it even says whenever this role is being created, you would have to add DynamoDB query, and also the DynamoDB put permission would be required, so that you would have to add them into the IAM role that's been created. So once this is created, and if you're creating, if you just say start execution, it'll ask you to enter in a specific input. So at that time, if you just say, if you take the specific input, say test at the rate test one as an email, and ID is also being passed. This fails because the whenever the state machine fails, the exception is available, which says here that the DynamoDB does not have state machine does not have permission to the DynamoDB table to perform a query operation. So whenever you would do that, you would have to go into the state machine, IAM role. In the IAM role, uh, as scope policy, this has been added, but you would have to edit it. So for read, get item is enabled, but the state machine is performing a query. So we'll have query, and also the state machine is doing a put item. So we'll enable that as well. Once that is enabled, you could start the execution and say start, and We can add policies. So say DB. Yeah. So once a permission is enabled, uh, DynamoDB queries uh, it has a query action permission. So once this is performed, it adds the response to check if user exists, and it returns the complete JSON object what the query returns. From the JSON object, we're checking in the choice, we're using this count where this complete object is being passed as an input, and in the choice, it is checking if the count is zero, it does a put item, otherwise it just passes it and ends the execution. So let us create a new execution, say def123, and the ID being 10. So with the input that's been passed, the specific email address, the query returns a response with count as zero. Since the count is zero, choice branches it to put item, and from the put item, the complete object response comes in with respect to the put item response. And once we use the same user, so say if we use this, if we use this user with the same execution, since this user is already created, the query returns that object, and from the object the choice goes to a default branch and it passes it. And step function also enables error handling. So we could go into the step functions and workflow studio whenever there's any error. So say there was an error with respect to the permission, so what you could do is error handling. You could add a catch for all the for the specific state where there are different type of errors that or exceptions that would come in. So if you say choose and fallback state, you could add, say it can invoke a specific lambda function, and in the configuration we'll say the next step has to be the choice and query if the error handling is enabled, we have a state, and at that time, the fallback state is going to be lambda invoke. So what happens here is whenever the query is being executed, if there's any specific error, it invokes the lambda function, and from the lambda function, we could do any specific error handling logic that's there. So let me head out to another state machine, which has error handling. So the another state machine is using a parallel operation, and this has a lot of operations that's been done. And here you can see that the lambda function the different states are lambda invoke. It is using a S3 SDK and also DynamoDB. From the lambda invoke, whenever the complete object is, whenever the state is invoking lambda function, it is returning an error message, which is uh, which is being caught by the error handling techniques. And if there's an error, what is happening is it's notifying over a SNS topic publish, and that topic gets the message, and there's a successful termination of the execution. So that once there's an error, the complete state does not errors up, but instead you can gracefully handle the errors and ensure that the errors are gracefully handled and complete the complete state machine flow has been successfully closed. So from the demo, there are different use cases where uh, so since this has been happening in parallel, whenever the Lambda function is getting invoked, there's also the S3 SDK that's been called, that's calling get bucket ACL and DynamoDB describe table. Here in this case, the output is S3 exception is there because there's a permission that's not allowing S3 operation. Since that is an error that's been caught in this complete parallel, that message is being sent into SNS topic, and the complete execution is successfully terminated. In So in a case where everything goes well and all the SDKs are working fine, all the SDK integrations are working fine, and everything returns a successful response. So uh, in the Lambda invoke, that is returning the success response, and list objects is also returning a successful response after it gets the bucket ACL. So this complete parallel uh, flow is being successfully executed. Since there is no error that's been caught, it does not notify the error to the SNS topic, and it successfully ends the execution of the workflow. So, what are the different use cases that step function has? Is uh, like I was showing you, different serverless function orchestration. So, with the 200 plus SDK integration, you can orchestrate, or you could have a workflow which is using multiple AWS SDK integration to perform specific tasks. It could be different automation of setup tasks. So, say for example, if you have uh, a setup that happens on the AWS account, like whenever there's uh, a new user that's being created, you would have to rotate the credentials, or you would have to perform certain IAM actions. All of those things could be automated with the step function execution. And also it integrates well with code build. So if you have a CI/CD pipeline which is using a specific flow, you could use code build and its workflows for step functions. uh, Step function has a very good way of integrating with AWS batch, and the whole concept of a sync comes into picture because the batch jobs have to be waited for a while, and uh, this could be a sync kind of a SDK or a service integration pattern that's available. The common use cases are something like user onboarding, where it goes through a series of steps, and based on those steps, you would complete the workflow. It could be things like payment gateway integrations, where, say, for example, you're integrating with Stripe or Razorpay, where once the user does payment, you would have to wait, you would have to check, the webhook would have to get called. Based on the webhooks, you will have to know that whether the uh, payment has been successful or failure. If the payment is successful, you would have to do certain steps. If it's been failed, you would have to do certain steps. All of it, which it could be used as a step function orchestration. So that's about step functions and about the session. Thank you for watching.